From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Lunch, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We look forward to greeting you back in our yacht club just as soon as conditions permit. But in the meantime, we're going to use the Zoom technology to bring you new guests each week. I started sailing in Belvedere in 1957 and have thought all that time that it's the most beautiful place to keep a sailboat. But as our speaker today will tell you, the maritime heritage of that region goes way past the relocation of San Francisco Yacht Club there in the 20s, and even before the Corinthian Yacht Club was founded in 1886 on the tip of the beautiful Corinthian island. So to tell us all about the maritime heritage of the Tiburon Belvedere Peninsula, today I'd like to welcome as our guest Dave Gotz, historian for the town of Tiburon and the archivist of the Belvedere-Tiburon Landmark Society. Dave Gotz, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thank you, pleasure.
All of us are eager to see just how the maritime heritage started. Show us, tell us all about it.
To begin with, I would like to, for those who aren't really familiar with the Tiburon Peninsula, you'll find it right here. And it is very unique in the San Francisco Bay, in which there's no other peninsula like it that projects out into the bay, and therefore has three long coastlines. So obviously maritime history should be an important part of the history of the peninsula, and it is. So we'll start with the introduction of the Tiburon Peninsula with a short video about the railroad coming to Tiburon.
Much of the way downtown Tiburon looks today is a direct result of the establishment of a railroad terminus here in the late 1880s. From the Shoreline Park and Main Street to the bike path that leads to town, the footprint of that original industrial enterprise remains. When John Reed was granted the 5,000 acres of the Rancho Corte Madera del Presidio in 1834 by the Mexican government, what is now the town of Tiburon was more water than land. Corinthian Island was indeed an island, and the whole of downtown was awash. 40 years later, the California gold rush had totally transformed the San Francisco Bay Area. Not only had the population exploded, but the silty runoff from the gold mining had begun filling up many of the shallow areas of the bay, including Tiburon. However, the Tiburon Peninsula was only sparsely inhabited. The only activities were the Reed and Lyford dairies, several brick kilns, a cod fishery, and an explosives factory. Everything changed when the railroad magnate Peter Donahue decided that Point Tiburon would be the perfect place for a ferry terminal to connect to his San Francisco and North Pacific Railroad lines, which ran up through Marin and Sonoma counties. In 1870, he had established a ferry connection to San Francisco for his Sonoma lines at a new town on the Petaluma River, named for himself. Although the town of Donahue grew into a bustling community with machine shops, warehouses, a hotel, and many residences, the long ferry ride was never very popular. When the competing North Pacific Coast Railroad started building a line to Sausalito, it was time for Peter Donahue to make the move south. In 1882, he created the San Francisco and San Rafael Railroad to connect his new terminal in the Marin capital to Point Tiburon. To make way for his new rail yard, Donahue had to turn the bluff point and adjacent marshes into a plateau. He did so in record time with a new machine called the steam shovel, and had crews working around the clock, creating the flat land that we now know. This photo from about 1883, a year into the work at Point Tiburon, shows what the Marin Journal reported in November of that year. This point has made a grand advance. The waterfront has a fine ferry slip, long wharf, tracks, a depot, machine shops, a store, boarding houses, etc., part of which have already been built, and all of which will be by spring. To bring a rail line from San Rafael to Tiburon, Donahue would spend nearly $700,000, because the line needed 3 tunnels, extensive low trestles over marshes, and a dramatic high trestle at Trestle Glen. The railroad first went through the 1,000-foot Cal Park Tunnel, coming out at what is now Larkspur Landing, where it crossed the Corte Madera Creek via a 90-foot drawbridge. The track then crossed over marshland on a low trestle before reaching solid ground near today's village at Corte Madera Shopping Center. A second tunnel of 1,900 feet went through the base of Ring Mountain, parallel to what is now Highway 101. The rails emerged into daylight close to the site of Kol Shafar Synagogue before hooking east past the new Reed Station and along the pastures of the Big Reed Dairy Ranch, which is now where Bel Air School is. A final 600-foot tunnel came out above the site of today's Belvedere and launched onto a massive trestle which crossed the marshlands which we now call Blackie's Pasture. The last 2.5 miles were an easy run along the picturesque Richardson's Bay, nearly all of which was made into the multi-use path in 1970. The final section was carried on a low trestle over the edge of Tiburon Lagoon. The last vestige of this lagoon is the small marsh and pond behind Town Hall. It didn't take long for Tiburon to prosper and grow. By the early 1890s, as this fine panorama shows, the train yards and Main Street are well established, with many of the buildings seen here actually barged down from the abandoned town of Donahue, including the large Sonoma House Hotel on the corner of Main Street, and the 4 matching 12-room boarding houses along the lagoon. For the next 60 years, the railroad defined the character of Tiburon, a bustling, hard-working community built on one of America's greatest industries.
The significance of the railroad coming to Tiburon cannot be understated. It's totally changed the landscape of the peninsula forever. Along with the railroad on the ground came the ferries on the water, took the railroad passengers to San Francisco and other points, and also brought people to San Francisco and up to Northern California. But it wasn't the first thing, and we'll get into earlier Tiburon heritage later, but this is the most important one. Because if it wasn't for the ferries coming to Tiburon, there wouldn't have been any residential development. So the Ukiah was built and launched in Tiburon in about 1889. It's the only ferry built in Tiburon. Apparently after that, it was just too much going on in the Tiburon ferry area for them to launch a new ship. So here's in 1892, the ferry Ukiah is at its wharf. The ferry was built right in about this area here. This is Main Street. Belvedere here, Corinthian Island. It wasn't called Corinthian yet. The island was named for the yacht club. We'll get to that later. These 2 towers contain a very important thing. They were called the Gallows Frame. And what they did, the big wheels lifted up and down the apron to level it with the ferry depending on the tide. And so rail cars could be loaded onto here directly without having any problems between the shore and the ship. And these, in this time of day, in this vintage, they were covered. Later on, they were exposed, and we actually have several of those wheels on display next to the Ferry Museum on the shoreline in Tiburon today. The last ones that were up, and we'll see them later in this presentation. So here's people arriving on the Ukiah. Right here is the Tiburon Depot. This was a long, beautiful Victorian era gangway, and beyond it were sheds for the passenger cars to pick up the passengers.
Who are these people and where are they going? Are these residents?
It's amazing this many people are coming to Tiburon, in business outfits, but apparently there are many, many people. This could been quite easily been after the earthquake. And in 1906, a lot of people left their homes in San Francisco, and they had summer homes that they turned into their full-time homes in Belvedere, more Belvedere than Tiburon. And so, but it also could be another thing, which is opening day on the bay, which is when they open the drawbridge, and we'll get to that a little later. But it did attract a lot of the yacht club people from the Corinthian Yacht Club, because that was originally their gig before San Francisco Yacht Club moved here. This is the depot building. Here's the ferry that just arrived. Back here is the number 3 railroad train that is going to San Rafael and then on to Northern California. Horses and buggies waiting to take passengers over to Belvedere. And a very elegant time still. This is 1900. And this building, of course, still stands, and we'll see a picture of it in modern times. This is an amazing panorama from 1905. So over here is Old St. Hilary's Church. This is the first Tiburon school. This is Main Street. Wharfs here. This is the Ukiah in its same slip where it was before. Way over here is the James M. Donahue. We'll talk about that later. There's the depot. So this is the passenger area at the far end of the yard. We'll see it from a higher perspective a little later. These houses are on Mar West, and I think most of these, this one, all still exists, as does this house up on Las Lomas. So we'll see that all through these videos of this, pictures of this direction. You'll see these houses are always still here. And there's, of course, Angel Island. Lots of yachts already parked outside. This is probably about 1905 or so. So here is 1900 from the opposite direction. So here's the James N. Donahue, which was a side wheeler. It wasn't active for much longer after the turn of the century. If you look closely at that picture of Donahue up on the Petaluma River, you would have seen the James N. Donahue there. It was built in 1875, but because it's a side wheeler, it became obsolete. These double enders were much more useful going back and forth across the bay. Dock in one end, dock in the other end. They still use them across the Hudson in New York. This is all wood piled up here for both the railroad engines and the ferries. They all burned wood at this time. Here's the Corinthian Yacht Club right here, Belvedere, of course, in the background. You come over here, this is Main Street. Corinthian Island, which at this time was still called Valentine's Island because a guy named Thomas Valentine owned it, and it stayed that way until it was developed in 1907. These were all boarding houses that were brought down from Donahue on the Petaluma River, and this is the Sonoma House Hotel, which was also in the background in that picture of Donahue. Those are the only buildings we know for sure that came down from Donahue on the Petaluma River to Tiburon. Most of the other buildings were built here. These two houses are for executives of the railroad, and they are still there. Beautiful houses, and you'll see them all through all these pictures right at the bottom of Las Lomas. This is Mar West in a very early stage. This is more or less what Paradise Drive is now coming through. So this is a really beautiful picture. And over here, you'll see Belvedere over here. This is the Belvedere School. This is the Presbyterian Church, which was later rolled down and became the Belvedere City Hall. And this is Beach Road over here, the very end of Beach Road, when it was a commercial street mostly. There's the James N. Donahue, one of my favorite ships because it's so beautiful and apparently was very elegant, plush seats, all that kind of stuff, but it just got old. This is 1913. It's already close to 40 years old. This you can see is Northwestern Pacific as opposed to the San Francisco and North Pacific, which was the original railroad. They merged into other railroads, and we'll talk about that a little later. Again, the Corinthian Yacht Club right behind, therefore we know it's after 1912 when the new Yacht Club building was built, which helps date a lot of photos, the transition from the old original Yacht Club building into the new one. Further down Mar West in this direction, there are boarding houses and so on for the railroad workers. They also had arks and houseboats and things on the edge of Belvedere. This is after that last one we saw, that nice panorama from the other direction. There was a fire in 1906 and it burned down pretty much all of Main Street. So these are all built since 1906, these ones here. And this building, which still stands, this is where the Waypoint Pizza is on Main Street. This is the oldest building, built in 1907 after the fire. There was a building just like it there before the fire, but this one replaced it in 1907. And there hasn't been anything that replaced that great big Sonoma House Hotel, which is right on this corner here. So this is more or less the corner of Main Street, Tiburon Boulevard today. Here's the Ukiah again at its normal dock with the gallows wheels. Nothing's much changed. It stayed like this for a long time. This is the ferry depot way over here for the passenger ferries. This is the passenger shed. We'll see that disappear in a while because in 1907, about 50 railroads merged into the Northwestern Pacific. And one of them was the North Pacific Coast, which ended in Sausalito. And this is the San Francisco North Pacific, in the San Francisco and North Pacific. And so when they merged, they didn't need two depots for passengers. And so the passenger traffic moved to Sausalito in 1909. And Tiburon is primarily maintenance of engines, and they could rebuild anything in this facility. Pullman cars, anything, they could build them here, they could fix them, they could rebuild all the engines. So it was mainly that and freight from 1909 on. There was some passenger traffic. We'll get to that a little bit later. There was a little shuttle that went between Tiburon, Belvedere, and Sausalito to take passengers to the Sausalito ferry who were lived in Tiburon or Belvedere. For a while, it was the Donahue, which is back here. There it is there. There's the James and Donahue still. And here's the Ukiah. And so it came and went sometimes with passengers over to Sausalito, from Belvedere and Sausalito. So this is the Tiburon, which was an older ferry, older than the Ukiah, again, a double ender. And that carried automobiles in the early part. And sometimes they had so many, they had to put them out the back. Looks like a happy group of automobilists who've just come back maybe from Sonoma, wine country or something. And they put a rope here just in case it wouldn't roll off. Panoramas is made actually of two pieces, splits in the middle right here. But this identifies some of the things you're looking at, and it's a very crisp picture. The yacht club, this is about 1922. Here's the James and Donahue, and you see that it no longer has its stack. A couple of years later, it was sold for scrap. So it sat here for a long time, and there's a story about a couple Corinthian yacht people came over and took the wheel and the eagle off of the James and Donahue, and they're still in the Corinthian Yacht Club. The eagle it was actually the eagle on before that even the railroads merged. So here you can see that there's no passenger shed anymore over here. It's just pretty much freight. You can see there's some vehicles down here that are probably picking up freight and stuff, and the occasional passenger. This is over here, we have Main Street. Over here is a palm tree, and that's the same palm tree you find downtown Tiburon. It was planted about 1920. It's right about there. And one of the boarding houses left that came down from Donahue's Landing. That's all that's left from the fire. Mar West, going out of town. This is San Rafael Ave. The lagoon, which is the Tiburon Lagoon, and the Belvedere Cove, connected by the drawbridge, what we'll see later, went all the way from the back of Main Street to San Rafael Ave. It was one big body of water, which is now all filled and partly the Belvedere Lagoon. So all of downtown Tiburon is fill. In 1922, the Ukiah was pretty worn out. It was used by the government during World War I. And the Northwestern Pacific decided to rebuild it. And it was renamed the Eureka. So the hull and the engines are still the original from the Ukiah, built in 1889. They put a new top on it and suited it out for cars instead of railroad. And so it became pretty much the flagship of the Northwestern Pacific, because it was 300 feet long. It was a very large ferry. And this one, after it was created and became the Eureka, I'm sorry, it could hold 2,300 passengers and up to 80 automobiles. And anybody who knows the Maritime Museum in San Francisco, that's where it is. And we'll have a nice picture of it a little later. So this is 1927. The railroad decided to abandon the double enders, more or less. They still ran for a while. And they bought these 3 diesel-powered auto ferries to carry automobiles. And you can see some cars right there on the dock. And they're loading on these 3 ferries. These 3 ferries eventually in the 50s went to Washington to become ferries between the islands. And they've served there until, some of them until the 1980s, these same ferries. There were 3 of them. Again, here you can see the houses, but things are growing up, but you see these same houses are here. This is a unique part of the railroad yard. This viaduct allowed people to go from these houses over here to Main Street without having to traverse the busy railroad yard. And that was there from the teens all the way until the 1950s. Even though actually later, I think the 1960s, there's some older people now who come in and say they used to go up and they walk across this wooden deck thing. There's the palm tree, which is still there.
Corinthian Yacht Club, this picture?
This is, yes, this is from Corinthian. Yeah, it's from Corinthian. This is the ferry boat Marin. And this is the main shuttle that took passengers from Belvedere, from Tiburon to Belvedere to Sausalito all day long to meet the ferry in Sausalito. And so it's an interesting little ferry that they built especially to do this trip. And then this is here's that same building where the Waypoint Pizza is now, but it used to be a dock, and the guy used to take people out tied to this boat. He'd take them out in rowboats and then set them free. He would usually go through Raccoon Straits around the other side to where there was, calmer water. And then they get in the rowboats and row around, and then you'd tow them back again. So they wouldn't have to traverse Raccoon Straits rowing. Any sailor knows, that's not a fun thing to do, even a sailboat sometimes, let alone a rowboat. This is where the dock was for the Marin Ferry coming from Tiburon to here to Sausalito. And it was right out near the tip of Belvedere, and it was there from the 19 teens until the 1930s. It's very easy to see. This picture has a lot of great things too, of course. Here's the dock. And then over here, this is Beach Road. And we're going to be talking about Beach Road a bit more when we talk about the yacht clubs, because the San Francisco Yacht Club had a very close attachment to Beach Road, and this is still there now. In the background here, this is Tiburon. Again, no houses, a few little farms. This is the Hilarita Dairy, which was later Reed School is now there from 1951. And so the dairy cows that they had at the 3 dairies grazed all these hills up here. And people ask, where are all the trees? There weren't any. They were either grazed or they were trees. Only trees could grow is in the valleys where the water collected in the winter, mostly oaks. And there's the Corinthian Yacht Club, of course. So in 1941, February 28th, the ferries ended. It was a sad farewell. A lot of people loved the ferries, just like that. March 1st, there were no more ferries across the bay in 1941, because by then the bridge had taken the traffic away. So the last remaining ferry of the railroad era, in good shape, of course, is the Eureka at the Maritime Museum. Well worth going and seeing it. Tremendous piece of equipment. So in the 1950s, the Tiburon rail yard was basically just freight only, and they had started using just barges. And it was Santa Fe tugs and barges, and here's Redwood obviously going out. And these things here's the gallows wheels. And these are now these actual gallows wheels are in front of the Railroad Museum on the waterfront, which is just down here in front of the depot. They had to load these down the center and then one car at a time with their 3 rails so that the thing wouldn't tip over. You can see here it's kind of listing a little bit. So these are both in the 50s. Here's the Railroad Depot, which is now used for various different things. In the late 50s, even Sterling Hayden had an office upstairs at the old ferry depot. And by now they're using diesel engines. And they use these 3 idler cars so that the weight of the diesel engine wouldn't go on the apron. So that's why there are 3 empty cars in between. So the ferries finally came back in 1962. There was no ferries from 41 to 62. People tried to do yachts and things and subscription services, but the ferry came back, the red and white fleet, the Harbor King, and that started it up again. By 1965, there are probably plenty of people out there who visited Tiburon during this era when the railroad was kind of just falling apart and disappearing bit by bit. Here's part of the viaduct. They've taken it down. Still operating a little. The last freight car to go out was September 1968. So here's 1910 and today. More or less the same view from up on Corinthian Island. And now we have ferries that look like this. And the depot looked like that, and now looks like this. And you're welcome to come to the Railroad Museum, run by the Landmark Society. We're open Wednesdays, Saturday, and Sunday, 1 to 4 p.m. And there's a complete scale model with operating HO trains of the railroad yard in 1909. So the next part of maritime heritage predates the railroad, and they're cod fisheries or codfish treatment plants. And there were 3 of them. And the earliest one wasn't even a plant. It was on the beach in a place called Stillwater Cove. And this is Beach Road, what we now know as Beach Road. This is Corinthian. Tiburon would be in here. And you can see they just sailed around all of it. It was all water. And this Captain Edwin Moody described them actually drying salted codfish, which had been come down from Asiatic ports. And he actually was one of the founders of the San Francisco Yacht Club, but also a good artist. This is the cod fishery that then was built on Beach Road later. And this is the China cabin, which is still there, which was another industry that I'm not going to go into, was shipwrecking. And this was taken off PS China, which was a Pacific Mail steamship that traveled from San Francisco to the Orient. in the 1860s and 70s. And when it was obsolete, because it was a wood hull side wheeler, they wanted screw and iron hull ships for the US mail. It was scrapped in Tiburon Harbor, and also over by Paradise Cay, they had a scrap yard. And the cabin was lifted off and taken over to Beach Road in 1886. So this is right after it was taken over here. And there it stayed until now. And we restored it in the 1970s. So this is Beach Road looking down from Corinthian Island. This was W.F. Stone had a boatyard here briefly. Probably many yachtsmen know the Stone name. He was here only for a few years on the shore of Beach Road. It was here much longer. Other boat builders took it over. This is still a cod fishery here. This is part of the shipwrecking business. This is a ship that had an apartment building stuck on the back of it. Next to it is the China cabin in here. You can't see it. And this is the Belvedere Lagoon. The way it looked, this is San Rafael Ave back here in 1896. One of my favorites, Beach Road in about 1907, looking down from Belvedere. This is a glass plate negative, and they scan so beautifully. And this has got so much detail on it. This is the Belvedere Land Company building, which was built in 1899. These are the Far cottages, which are still there. This is the Belvedere Hotel, massive hotel on the corner, right at the beginning of Beach Road, or at the end of Beach Road going up into the island. The China cabin is right here under a pitched roof. They put a pitched roof on it, which thankfully saved the roof of the original building. Here's the cod fishery still here in this silly thing called the Tropic Bird, which was half ship, half apartment building. This is the Drawbridge, very famous part of history, because the only way to get from San Rafael or the rest of the world out the Tiburon Peninsula was to take this road, which is called the County Road, later San Rafael Ave, then Beach Road, all the way in around here, which is now Arc Row, and into Tiburon. There was no road on this side because the railroad came right up to the edge of the water, and there was nowhere to build a road next to it. So the road directly into Tiburon Boulevard, what it's now called, didn't exist until 1930. This all got filled in before that happened. So in the distance here, you see Old St. Hilary's, the Tiburon School, which was built in 1901, the houses on Mar West, several of these all are still there. This is the oil tank for the railroad, where they shifted from wood to oil, and water tanks for steam. Here's that little house that we've seen up on the top from the other direction. There are some other little buildings here. This is just when the Corinthian development company started in 1907, bought the island, started developing, but these were here before that. There are no houses yet been built. So this thing would open and close every spring and fall to let the arcs and so on that were out in the cove and boats to go in and be sheltered behind Corinthian for the winter. And in the spring, they'd come out, and it was celebrated as opening day on the bay. And that's apparently is where the name comes from as far as we're concerned. This would be kind of where the post office is. The boardwalk shopping center's about here. There were many different drawbridges here over the years. The last one was a concrete causeway with a little bit of an opening right about here. Part of that concrete causeway is still there at the turn of Beach Road into Main Street, or into Arc Row. You can still see the concrete from the last bridge, which was built in like the 20s. And so they just filled it in with rocks underneath it eventually and stopped the flow. But that was much later. On this side, there's the barn, which held the horses and buggies. You can see one right out there. Horse and buggies to pick up freight and people from the trains. Beach Road had actually quite a bit of business here. There was boarding houses, there were lumber yards, there were the shipbuilders, of course. There's some arcs here parked on the backside. There are arcs over here. Some of these, they would drop down off of these landed things and put them back in the water. And then they would put them up here in the winter, up on blocks. And you can see actually the Belvedere Lagoon, which was later developed out of this area here. Part of it was always marshland too. It wasn't all water. And this is the barn where all the stuff was kept, and the barn road in Belvedere is because the barn was there. It was torn down in 1966. Here's another view from about the same time, but from a different angle. Here you see the hotel, the Far cottages, cod fishery here, the barn, the drawbridge is right here. You see a lot more arcs up on stilts over here, probably for the winter. This is probably maybe a winter or late summer. These will eventually get pulled down in here or maybe put up here, or they'll pull them into the shore here. Beach Road is a fascinating road because it is nothing like this now, except for the China cabin. It's the only thing left. And the Far Cottages. Yep, those are the only things left. So here's opening day on the bay, 1903. This is probably the most popular shot. You see it around sometimes because it's a really clear one. I haven't found any single shot of opening day in the bay when they actually see an arc or something coming through. They're just people rowing, but it was a big gathering. This could well be that group that you saw getting off the ferry. And some of these buildings are still there. This building right here with this little vent, if you go down Ark Row, this building is the last little house on Ark Row, and it's still there. And this one was moved and put on top of another one. It's back over here somewhere. One more view of Beach Road, 1924. Now you have the Pacific Motorboat Club, which is still there. And here, one of the later versions of the Drawbridge, quite different than before. The barn is still there, of course, and this is the China cabin right here. The Pacific Motorboat Club, yes, that was built in 1911, where we all started with cod fishery here. This is where the cod fishery was, and it was built in 1911. The cod fishery was torn down in 1910 or so. So now we'll move to the west shore of Belvedere. This is the topic of cod fisheries. This is another cod fishery, a very large industry here, called Piscata Landing. And it was started in about 1870. And one of the most remarkable things about this picture is you see there are no trees. Just like the Tiburon Hills, Belvedere had no trees either. The Belvedere Land Company was organized in 1890, and they planted 15,000 trees, eucalyptus and all kinds of nasty things, redwoods and Douglas fir. And so by 1905, it's all forested.
Where it says Piscata Landing, is this Richardson Bay water we're looking at?
We're sitting in Richardson Bay looking back at it. So we're looking from the direction of Sausalito. This is the west shore of Belvedere facing Sausalito.
This is West Shore Drive now, right?
West Shore, when West Shore Road was made, they did dredge and pull land down into the water. But until then, which was much later, it was just right against the shore. And it grew quite a bit. It became the Union Fish Company when it merged with another cod fishery we'll see in a minute, which was on the Tiburon East Shore, totally opposite side. What we're saying is this is the same location. It just grew in 25 years and became a much bigger plant. This is all housing down here, and this is the operations over here. So this is after the land company has planted 15,000 trees. So it's now part of the Belvedere Land Company, but they're still on tide lots. They're not beholden to the land company at all.
And this is a picture taken from Richardson Bay.
Run on a ship looking back at the west shore of Belvedere. This is the very tip of Belvedere here. And so you're looking sort of south and east a little bit. This is what they did with the cod fishery. They had these flakes, they called them, where they just dry them in the sun. And obviously the west shore of Belvedere is perfect. Get great sun. They had the deep water to bring them in. So it was a really successful operation. And all this came from Alaska and the Siberian coast. There was a huge fire in 1937. It burned all the cod fishery buildings to the right of this. Now we're still looking at the same west shore here, but all was left were these bunkhouses and a warehouse. And by then, the Belvedere Land Company had purchased all the property because the cod fishery was gone. And they rented it out as housing during World War II. Some of the people actually worked at Marin ship straight across Richardson Bay, and they would row their boat over to go to work. But it also became an artist colony. And one interesting thing is I told you that they had to walk over because the West Shore wasn't very much of a shore to walk around. So they had these stairs in the back that went up and over to Belvedere, and that's how they'd get their supplies from downtown Tiburon. So the artists lived here from the 50s until the early 60s. A pretty well-known sculptor named David Lemon, who did the Christus Rex, which is in the St. Stephen's Church in Belvedere. Jerry O'Day was his wife, and it was quite a bohemian hangout, and it was quite famous. There were other famous artists who lived there too. Great place to live right along the shore. These are probably 1960 or so, maybe late 50s.
Okay.
And this is all, and he did these sculptures of very fine sanded wood sculptures. We have a couple still. They've been very collectible today. And this is inside their bunkhouse. Very nice, comfortable place to live. And still over the water coming underneath it at high tide. Now we're going to move to the east shore of Tiburon, Paradise Drive shore, basically is what we're saying. And this area has a long history, starting with, again, another cod fishery. Linden Hoe started in 1877. They bought land from Benjamin Lyford, who owned all that tip with his wife, Hilarita Reed. And they bought tide lots too out front. And again, deep water here. We'll see what it becomes later, and you'll see why it's deep water also, and why it became a very long-term location for maritime industries.
David, you just mentioned a couple of amazing names. Sir Lyford and his wife, Hilarita Reed.
Yes.
Daughter
Daughter of John Reed. This is, I mean, I say the whole Reed family story is an entire lecture on its own. That's the history of Tiburon Peninsula on the land. They didn't do much as far as maritime. They rented to people and stuff and made money that way, but they really were not doing anything maritime at all, the Reed family. Those, again, the flake yard, it says up here, and this was called Linden Hoe, and they were there, and they eventually merged with the one on Belvedere, became the Union Fish Company. So they're the flake yards. You can see them drying in the sun. We don't get as much sun. I'm on Paradise Drive. You don't get as much sun over here as you get on West Shore, but they obviously got enough. The same operation. It was, dried codfish apparently was a great delicacy, and everybody loved it. But they closed in 1904 when they merged with Piscata Landing, the Union Company, and the place was bought by the United States Navy, or the military. And what they were going to do is,
so this is the backside of Tiburon. This is the
backside of Tiburon. This is all along the back shore of Tiburon, and you'll see soon. I'll give it away. So this is where the net depot was. This is where the Romberg Center is now. This is all the same site, because for one reason, the deep water. This also had deep water right off the shore, as it does today still. These are all the little hills that come out as you go along the back side of the Tiburon Peninsula. So this is what they built. And this is 1908. This is Red Rock. Everybody knows Red Rock, yeah. This is where the bridge is now, San Rafael Richmond Bridge. This tower is still there. It's a water tank. It's still there today. And so this is the gantries. You'll see the full thing. The coal would be put in here, even in the water, because coal has a tendency to catch fire. So it was fine that it was in water. So they had that dug out for laying the coal. And then the most amazing thing is that when this was finished in 1908, the Great White Fleet came to San Francisco with Roosevelt's fleet, 43 ships, including 16 battleships, the big white battleships. And here they are. And most of them came in and got coal at the brand new coaling station. They got it, being military, they got it done just in time to celebrate the Navy coming here. So they all came in here and filled up with coal in here, and they had these huge gantries. We'll see some better pictures. But this was all built on the same place where the cod fishery started. All the same location. And here it is again. This is a big operation. All the coal had to actually be brought on colliers, like this one. They brought it on ship and put it on ships. I mean, it was kind of weird, but that's the military does stuff like that, I guess. There were a couple of collieries, one up in, I think, Sitka, one in Puget Sound, and then actually there was another one in Mare Island. I mean, for a long time, the Bay Area was a very military-oriented place. There's a lot of Navy action here, as any other Navy historians would know. I'm not one, but I know that. So these great big things would dig the coal out, put them in these little tiny cable-driven carts that would go all the way around and then dump it in the ship, or they would dump it on a barge that would take it out to the ship if it was moored out here. And again, here's your Red Rock. So you know where you are now, in the Richmond shore over here. So there's a beautiful picture from 1919, all the coal piled up. Some of these buildings are still there. It's amazing. I'll get to that. And here's that water tower. And then the next thing happened is that the coal shifted to oil. So there was no more need for coal. So they cleared it all out. And for about 10 years, the state leased it from the federal government, and that's where the California Nautical School was based for its first few years, training officers for the Merchant Marine. So this is when it started in 1931. Here they are. This is the gate. It's still there. It's no longer says California Nautical School. And I love this picture. Here's the gantry back behind them from the coaling station with those great big things we used to run on. And this is 1934. I love this guy. I mean, this guy is really something. I mean, look at him with the round. I mean, he could be today with the round white glasses. I mean, I just saw this. I said, this guy is really different.
Yeah.
Eventually, the war happened, and the Navy wanted it back, and so they found their permanent home in Vallejo, and they're still going. But they started right here in Tiburon at the former cod fishery coaling yard. And now the next thing that came through here, even before, while the young men were still becoming maritime merchant mariners, Roebling Company came in and spun cable for the Golden Gate Bridge in a property they bought at the far end, the north end of the property, which we'll see from an aerial photo later. And they spun cable for the suspension, the main suspension. They brought the cables actually in from the east. They spun them in a factory that's just off here. That was another industry that went on in the same property, only for a brief time, from 35 to about 1940, when the Navy kicked everybody out because they wanted the whole place. And so these are the hills of Tiburon looking north. So the next thing that happened was the anti-submarine net.
Wow.
And this undated photo, but this is how far it stretched all the way across from somewhere around Sausalito, all the way over to the St. Francis Yacht Club.
The upper right-hand corner there, that is, yeah, right in there. That looks
Right here, I mean, do you think, I don't know if there's any history at your club that knows that it actually anchored there.
Yeah, because there's Fort Mason to the left.
Yeah.
Zoom into that area. Can we do that?
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy, but we can see enough.
Yeah, that's where the yacht club was, right?
Yeah,
there.
it looks like it's right here. And of course, there were gates that could be opened and closed, obviously, to let shipping traffic. But they had started building the nets in 1940 in anticipation of the war.
Wow.
And this was 85% in place on December 7th, 1941. And they had given this orders out to all ships that 2 days earlier that they could only come through these certain gates, that they wouldn't be able to get in or out of the harbor unless they went through these gates. So that 2 days before Pearl Harbor, they had this thing ready. Amazing. In 1940, they had 2 officers and a handful of enlisted men. And by 1941, they had the whole thing done.
Tell me what we're looking at.
These are buoys with nets that hang below them. We'll see more detail later. 2 different sizes. They had submarine nets, which were big square nets. And then they had really fine circular nets that were for torpedoes. And this went on, I think, in several other West Coast harbors. And so this wasn't the only place they built nets, but they built a lot of the nets for elsewhere. Let's go have a look closer. We'll start here. This is their logo, octopus grabbing a submarine. This is an aerial view looking at what we've been talking about all this time. This was where the cod fishery was. The coaling station was here. The cadets marched up and down here. There's the water tower that you saw in the other photos. This is Paradise Drive going along here. First, we'll have a closer look at all this stuff. These are barracks. Here's the gantry still remaining from which they actually used to lift the nets. They actually repurposed the gantries from the coaling station to lift the nets. All accessories, we'll get a closer look at these in a bit. Commandant's house, and there's a movie theater over here. There's a blacksmith shop in here. There was all kinds of stuff, and a lot of these buildings are still there. This was, like I said, this is where Roebling was. These 2 buildings here, they bought this end and then they sold it back to the military. This is now up at the top where the offices for the Romberg Center are, and their conference rooms are up here, which is much closer to Paradise Drive. So that's that part. Now we'll go over here, and what you see here is a thing called Ring Point, and that was blown up and leveled to become Paradise Cay. This is Ring Mountain right here. If you're familiar with Tiburon, there's a eucalyptus tree right here that you see that's still there. Great big eucalyptus tree. So this is the shore of Tiburon on the east side. So this is a amazing story. This net depot. I mean, the speed at which they got it up and running, put the nets in the bay in less than a year, and it just went from a handful of people to a big operation. This is actually the Delta King over here, which was used for various different purposes. It was used as a boarding facility for some of the sailors that were here. So there are the nets. This is the anti-submarine nets. This is the deck there that you saw. That was what was so perfect about this, is they concreted the whole thing in. That used to be where the coal was. And these are tin buoys which hold the net up. And then they had a giant concrete block, 10-ton block at the bottom that held it to the bottom.
These giant buoys are like 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and
They're pretty big.
they hold up the top of the net, and the bottom, you say, is anchored
With a concrete block.
But you and I know that's like a 4-mile span or so going
Oh,
across.
7. It was 7 miles of
Wow.
netting. I know, it's unbelievable how they achieved this.
Yeah.
Working hard. All handmade too. These are all probably hand screwed, bolted, each one of these little knuckles.
Yeah.
And then, so look at all this stuff.
Yeah. Buoys, yeah.
All lots of it, and they concreted this big deck, which is exactly the same there. It's still there today. Here's the gantry that they used. Later on, they didn't use the gantries anymore to lift these things. So they just drag them off the edge. They build them out here, drag them off the edge. This is a little later. They started stockpiling a lot. They also, I think, started when the war started to turn, they started picking this stuff up. So here we are. This is getting toward the end of the war. And here they are. They use the Roebling facility to create the torpedo nets. So this is the Roebling facility. So it was perfect. They are making more things out of wire. What better than a wire place?
What do you mean a torpedo net? What do you mean by that?
The anti-torpedo nets are much smaller. They're rings of only about, you can see how big they are. They're about 18 inches in diameter, but they're looped together as a long mesh, almost like what the old, armed, what do they call them? Knights used to wear, the chain mesh they used to wear, only it's much bigger, but it's big enough, small enough to trap a torpedo.
How would it work? They throw these alongside the ship so the torpedo didn't get to the ship?
No, these were strung out there too.
Okay.
With the probably on the other side of the submarine nets where they hung the same way. These had the little buoys as well. Shows you the specialized ships they had.
Wow.
For pulling these things around. Here's one of the nets, with the buoys and this is the torpedo net. You see, it's pretty small.
Okay.
We actually have a few sections of it in the archives. So there they are, towing it out. Yeah, this is shore of east side of Tiburon, and that's probably Bluff Point right there. Or that could be the tip of Angel Island. You can't quite tell from this angle. It could be the tip of Angel Island as well. So there they are in place. I don't know exactly where this is. If somebody might be able to figure out where this is. It's difficult to tell by the terrain because a lot of the terrain around the bay looks the same. So that's where it's suspended. This probably happened more often than once. The net get tangled in the screws of the ship.
Wow.
This is one of my favorite pictures. I mean, this is the coast of Tiburon. Look at all these ships. This is probably toward the end of the war. This is Ring Point right there. That would be where Paradise Cay is.
Okay.
But there looks like some battleships here. There's a Liberty ship here. This is like all over the place. And if you look on USGS maps from the 40s, they're big dotted circles here saying Navy, no entry. They reserved all these waters around here. And there's why. This is kind of neat too. A blimp.
Holy cow, yeah.
And there's Red Rock, and the bridge isn't here yet. Of course, the bridge, San Rafael Bridge, wasn't built until the late 50s. Then, obviously the war ended. They stockpiled the stuff for a while until the 50s. It closed in 58. They continued to teach navies from other parts of the country, parts of the world, how to do these nets. And they had a lot of leftover bits. There's a lot all stacked up nice and neat military style here. All over the place, and there's Paradise Park over here. There's another shot from the 1940s, late 40s, where these balls are all just stacked up on all these terraces of Paradise Park. So now you see here's Tiburon Boulevard winding around through here. I mean, I'm sorry, not Tiburon Boulevard, Paradise Drive. So then NOAA came in, and there was a marine fishery here, all still government, a marine minerals outfit that went out trying to discover buried undersea mineral. And this is a while before the Romberg Center was purchased. It purchased it in 1978. You can see this is definitely military. Look at how nice and neat and tidy everything is. All very nicely painted and everything. And this is what it looks like today. Movie theater still there. Water tank, there it is. Here's part of the gantry. There's a little bit of the gantry left. They didn't tear it all down. It's still there.
So I see it's still useful if they want to have 6 foot.
Yes. Oh yeah, they use it, and they have a few boats that they can go in and out and do testing. There are a lot of small boats here. I have another. I wanted to get a shot from looking down like those others, which would be from Paradise Drive, with all trees in the way now. This is from the other direction, looking north. There's the Bay Bridge. So it gives you an idea of how much of the gantry is still there. The gantry support is still there. The barracks are all still there, the old ones.
And when you use the term gantry, what does gantry mean to you?
The gantries are those big cranes on rails.
Okay.
And these are where the rails, this is what supported them. There were two here, and there were 2 way over here, one on the deck and one on that dock that goes out on the tip.
Got it. Okay.
So just walking around this, I took these pictures a few days ago, just walking around, it's unbelievable how much history still is there that hasn't been torn down because it's been part of the university. If this had gone to developers, beautiful location, great view, all that kind of stuff. So there's amazing things. I mean, like the tower, the water tower is still there. And they actually, there were, along with the net depot, they trained divers to go down and maintain them at the bottom. And they use that water tower as a diving practice area. It's a huge tank. It's, I don't know, 10,000 gallons or something. And they use that old water tower that goes back to the coaling station as a diving practice tank. So it's just amazing the way they reuse this and reuse it and reused it. Here we got yacht clubs. I'm not an expert in yacht clubs, so I apologize in advance. Obviously, the San Francisco Yacht Club, founded in 1869 in San Francisco, moved to Sausalito in 1877 to this building that they built. This was destroyed by fire in 1887. And then they built this in 1898, which is still the Trident restaurant. And then left Sausalito for a similar reason, leaving San Francisco because of the ship traffic. This is right near obviously near the big ferries, the big Eurekas and the Tiburon ferries. This is from the San Francisco Yacht Club collection with notes on here. They acquired the old Belvedere Hotel property in 1924, but in the meantime, they had to have some place to go. So they actually used the Pacific Motorboat Club as their clubhouse for a few years while they were building the new clubhouse, because they decided that the hotel was not rebuildable into something usable. This is the hotel in 1916, gorgeous hotel. By the 20s, it started to fail. And my theory is that more and more people built houses on Belvedere and their guests could stay with them. And they didn't have to stay at a big hotel anymore. It was a beautiful grand hotel. And here again this is Beach Road, and here are the Far Cottages. The Cove House is a whole nother story. We don't need to go into that. This was a separate property. Eventually, it's been acquired by the San Francisco Yacht Club, of course, but it was a separate house. Dr. Payne built it in 1916, this is just about finished. I think there's just some kind of junk here. It looks like it's still just being finished. There you see it here. This is a view from out on Corinthian Island. Here's the Motorboat Club. Mm-hmm. And I can see somebody took this picture because there's snow on Mount Tam. That always happens. We got some great pictures because there's snow on Mount Tam. Somebody decided to take a picture. So there's Beach Road. This is the China Cabin again, the Far Cottages, a few little other shacks along here. There's the hotel. That's the property they acquired. Down here you can see is the Cove House. This is what it looked like when they acquired it. There had been some big storms. Beach Road got hit pretty hard. In 21, they got hit really hard. This was probably a little later. People said it burned down. It never burned down. This is what it looked like when they acquired it. It was just falling to bits. So it took them a little while. This is the Commodore Clifford Smith standing out in front of it. And so then they tore it down, and here it is. The Cove House is still here, but the hotel's gone. They haven't started building yet. This is up Beach Road, these pilings if you go up Beach Road. Here's their announcement of their new building in the early 30s. Clifford Smith is still the Commodore. Then they have 3 different facilities at this point. Probably 38, 39. I believe this picture is 39.
Yeah.
When they finished the yacht club. This is the very earliest one. And here we are on Beach Road. We got where they were before, the Pacific Motorboat Club, which is still there. That's owned by the Allen family, the land company. Everything on Beach Road is owned by the Allen family, actually. But again, still, even in 1939, the Tiburon Hills, completely empty still. This is one of my favorite shots. It's the same year, but it's a great look down on from up on Belvedere, probably up on Beach Road, looking down at the Yacht Club and all the other buildings along Beach Road. The barn's still here. It looks like when you look at this closely, there's a lot of people gathered here. And I'm not sure, maybe it's the opening ceremonies for the Yacht Club. I haven't been able to determine what is going on, but there's a lot of people in the little square, that's between the land company building and the Yacht Club. There's something going on. We can see there's a whole bunch of people down here.
Yeah.
See all those people? They're doing something, but I haven't figured out what it is yet. And then here you can see also the beginnings of the Belvedere Lagoon. This would be Peninsula Road. So it's already been started fill. There's some interesting things here. There's the barn when it was a gas station. And that's all we got there for the Yacht Club.
Great.
Okay, here's what it looked like in 1962, just after they built their harbor building over here. And then I tried to get this shot today, but it's close. You can't see the Yacht Club building over here though. Too many trees again. So let's go to the Corinthian Yacht Club. So it was started in 1886. This is something I didn't realize. It was owners of small yachts was their specific charter. Corinthian meant an amateur. So they're all supposed to be owners and maintain their own boats and so on.
In 1900, the Corinthian Yacht Club was quite a renowned racing club. And just like you said, small boats generally breed greater sailors. The smaller the boat, the fewer the crew, the faster the learning curve. And that is right. Corinthian means a non-pro. Very cool.
So this is a pretty early photo of their clubhouse. This path that you're standing on is the path that leads to Main Street. So it would have been the driveway, but for a long time it was just a dirt path along this is the edge of Corinthian Island. They leased the tip from Thomas Valentine, who owned the island, and they blasted away the tip and leveled it out because it was a rocky tip before. And then they built their little clubhouse here. So this is a really nice early one. It's a very nice picture too. It's very clear. I came across this one and there's only one picture like this where they have these great big letters, CYC up here.
Wonderful.
I know, it's quite unique.
1889.
Yeah, I think that's just a guess, but it's probably around there. Because City of Valentine. See here, you can see they chopped this off, and this is probably the original edge of Corinthian or Valentine's Island. They just chopped it off to give a level building spot, and that's the little path that runs back to Main Street. I love this one with their mascot. I think his name was Dickie, the raccoon. It's a wonderful photo on the front steps of the original club. You see gentlemen and just kind of regular guys together. Some guys look just kind of aloof, and this guy looks like he'd be working on your boat, but he's probably one of the sailors. They probably all are. This is the first yacht club in its last iteration, right before it was rebuilt using this lower section still and built up on top of it. They said there was a fire, but no one seems to think there was actually a fire. There was a fire that destroyed records, but there wasn't a fire to destroy the building. There's no evidence of it ever being burned. They tore it down and built the great big new one. And that was in 1912. First, I thought this was earlier, but then in their own book, they said this is the celebration on July 4th, 1912 of the new clubhouse. But you can't see it. It's over here. But this part remained even though they built a new clubhouse. But I love this photo. There's so much stuff going on here. I mean, obviously it looks like a major party. I like the fact that they caught this woman diving in halfway in, and it's a great view of Main Street. Tiburon Hotel, markets, stores we know about. J. Kelly, the general merchant, he was a long merchant there. This wonderful eucalyptus tree that was here forever, survived several fires of Main Street. And then when they build that brick bank building at the end of Main Street, they cut it down.
Wow.
So this is a pretty neat picture.
Very.
A lot of detail. This is what makes historic pictures so great. And of course, our wonderful old St. And there's the Tiburon School again. Built in 1901, lasted until 1925.
Great.
The first Tiburon public school. So then there's the beautiful new building, built on the old building. This is the Tiburon Harbor. There it is.
Yeah.
Beautiful, calm day in there. And there's the yacht club from this direction. There's the first reruns of the ferries in 1960s. I love this shot. It's just very artistic.
More houses on Belvedere now.
Of course. And those are the Sausalito Hills in the background. And then a good aerial of Main Street and the extent that the place had grown. This fun thing here is when they built this extension of the parking lot, this house was actually here. And all the old photos, this house was out front. I think it belonged to Sam Vella of Sam's. And they moved it back here, and it's still there behind the bank building. Of course, there's Tiburon Tommy's and Sam's and all the rest. Early on here, there's nothing in these areas. This is all, of course, fill. This was all water in those early pictures from Beach Road all the way to Tiburon. This was all water.
But you do see the lagoon now fully formed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's all finished by now. Yeah.
As far as lagoon, right?
This is, I was out a few years ago or a year or so ago with somebody and got some nice pictures. I bug people to take me out so I can take these now pictures. The only disappointment is they were dredging right out in front.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's a lovely view of the open space and Old St. Hilary's. I'm always looking for our properties. So now we have the last part of the show is the little Tiburon Yacht Club right down below me here that I've looked at for the last 26 years. I'm just going to start with an aerial of Paradise Cay from 1978. Wasn't quite finished yet. Started in 55, and I think they started selling houses in the early 60s. But the Tiburon Yacht Club started back here. Their yacht club house was back in this corner. They were founded in 1965 as the Paradise Yacht Club and then the Paradise Harbor Yacht Club. And their first clubhouse was actually a barge that had been used by the company that built Paradise Cay. So they gave them the barge, they rebuilt it a couple times, and they had that clubhouse all the way until they had to move because they put in the condominiums here. And now their new clubhouse is all the way out here. So there's the original clubhouse, which was tucked back in that corner. TYC, a couple palm trees next to it. I think those palm trees are still there. When you turn right to go out the spit, that corner is where the yacht club was. And this is a great picture. This is 1966.
Wow, what a great picture.
Nothing there.
Right.
This is what it looked like before they built all the houses. Now there's all nice houses here. There's $2 million houses lining this. Oops, not to the back. There.
There you go.
So these are all new houses here now. There's the clubhouse.
Right. Okay.
There's the ubiquitous barge and dredge, which is always digging up this place.
Right.
Yeah. So it changed a lot since this is more or less the same spot. It's right on a curve of Paradise Drive. You can look down and see the same shot that they took in 66.
So this is 1966. Right. And this is the beginning of as Mosley's building, maybe 10 years into Mosley's building of Paradise and the harbor.
Yep.
And he first built the southern edge out for houses and lagoons. And then here, the northern peninsula is still nothing built there. This is before the clubhouse goes to the end of it and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's totally barren. Yeah. They built their first clubhouse would be back over here in this corner. In 60 years after this was taken back, way back at the end here. And then now we look like that.
Wow.
And so the clubhouse is here, which was built in 2001. They built that clubhouse. And they built all these. These all were built in the last 5 years.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. And all this in front was built in the last 10 years. In Red Rock, again. So I would just do this picture because this gives you an idea of all the places we went today. So first we were here, where the railroad was. 1960, so there's still a little operation going on there. The barge dock's still there. The depot's still there. So then we went over to Beach Road, where the first cod fishery was, and the various things. There's the San Francisco Yacht Club. Then we went over here to West Shore, and there's that big rock. So the cod fishery was just sort of about this much right here and extended out into the water before West Shore Road was built. Then we went all the way over to here and there, Romberg Center, cod fishery, coaling station, net depot, NOAA, Roebling building wires, all in this one place over those years. Then we came back to the Corinthian Yacht Club and the San Francisco Yacht Club over here. And the Tiburon Yacht Club way out here. That's pretty good here. That shows very little has gone on. But they started here and now they're out here. And this is 60. So that's just getting going. There's nothing built there yet.
Right. Right.
This is Ring Mountain on top. And next time you go down Tiburon Boulevard, leaving Tiburon, before you get to Blackie's pasture, look up and you'll see this eucalyptus tree. It's been there since the 1930s. Still there, gigantic. If you go up and climb Ring Mountain, it's about maybe 10 feet in diameter. Fabulous eucalyptus tree, managed to survive all this time. And a lot of good sailing in here too. Small sail, little.
And an incredible number of great sailors come from guys who learn to sail in the lagoon and Belvedere Cove. Belvedere Cove, the wind is like sailing in a lake. The wind keeps changing direction. If you go another 50 yards, the wind's coming from a different direction. So you're constantly trimming your sails all the time. So an inordinately large number of great sailors came from this whole area that you've been talking about. These are all really, really, the maritime heritage of Tiburon is pretty cool. So thanks so much, Dave, a historian for the town of Tiburon and the Belvedere-Tiburon Landmark Society. Thank you very much for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Pleasure.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.